Today we are moving from solid object into something far less stable, light itself. In the previous theme, we look at artists who made us think about material, repetition, and the viewer's body in space. But this week we keep many of those same questions. But now the medium is light, something that can fill a room, tint a wall, alter perception, and even seem to disappear if the electricity is turned off. The opening image is Schizoneer, Tunnel of Tears, a permanent installation in the Center for International Light Art in Unna, Germany. Notice that the work does not sit politely in front of us like a traditional sculpture. It stretches, loops, and glows through the architectural space. The room itself becomes part of the artwork, an experience that I will never forget myself being there. That is the key shift for today. We are no longer asking only what object I'm looking at. We are also asking how is this environment being transformed? How is my perception being changed? Light art is especially powerful because it works directly on the senses. It can guide the eye, alter the mood, change the apparent size of the room, and make color feel like something physical. As we go to the lecture, keep one big question in mind. If light has no weight, no stable mass, and sometimes no lasting forms, what makes it art rather than simply illumination? That question will guide everything we are working on this lecture. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to do three things. First, identify how artists use technologies such neon, fluorescent light, LEDs, and architectural space as an artistic media. In other words, how do ordinary commercial technical materials become art? Second, describe how light art changes color, space, and the viewer's bodily experience. With these works, you do not simply stand at a distance and look. You often walk in, wait, adjust your eyes, and become conscious of your own movement in the room. Third thing, compare four major directions in light art that appear in this presentation. Sculptural line, perceptual space, immersive environment, and program public installations. These categories will help to distinguish artists. You may always use or they use light and do that in different ways. If you can explain one artwork using at least one vocabulary term, one theme claim, and a few specific details, you will be in very strong shape for the quiz. Let's define light art clearly. Light art is art in which light itself is the primary medium, not just a tool used to illuminate another object such as painting or sculpture. That distinction matters. In a traditional museum setting, lighting usually helps us see the artwork. In light art, the lighting is the artwork. The artist uses light to alter spatial perception, manipulate vision, transform architecture, or immerse the viewer in a changing environment. The near terms on this slide are helpful because they show the range of ideas connected to the theme of light and space. It refers especially to artists associated with the Southern California who explore perception and sensory experience. Perceptual art points us towards work that change how we see. Site-specific installation reminds us of many light works that depend on a particular room, building, and outdoor location. Immersion suggests totally bodily involvement in the installation. And phenomenology reminds us that live sensory experience is central. The image here is Here shows a Dan Flavin installation made near Richmond Hall in Houston. That local connection is worth pausing for a moment. Even though this is an online class, I'm teaching from Houston, and Houston gives us a real access point into this theme. A few fluorescent tubes may simply very basically feel they are nothing. But once they flood the room with color, the entire space becomes the artwork. That is one of the big ideas for today. Light does not just sit inside an artwork, it reshapes the environment all around us. This theme matters because light art changes the basic question we ask. Instead of asking, what object am I looking at? Light art asks, how is this space changing my perception? That is a major shift. The meaning of the work often lies less in a solid form and more in the experience it produces. Color is also transformed. In painting, color usually sits on the surface. In light art, color becomes an environment. It spreads across walls, floors, ceiling, glass, haze, mirrors, or even the viewer's own body. Technology also becomes expressive. Neon fluorescent tubes, projection mirrors, mist, and LEDs are not just practical tools. They carry meaning. They suggest industry, modernity, commercial culture, public spectacle, and a contemporary city. And finally, the viewer's body becomes part of the artwork. Looking turns into walking, waiting, adjusting, and sensing. Some works reward patience, others create disorientation. Some are theatrical, others feel contemplative and even spiritual. And in every case, perception is active and not passive. So here are the main terms to keep in mind. Light art, art in which light itself is the central medium. Perception, the process of seeing and sensing. In light art, the viewer's experience is not secondary, it is part of the artwork. Lack of materiality in it. Art that lacks physical substance or conventional math. Light can fill a room and affect us deeply, yet it has no solid body in usual sculptural sense. Neon and fluorescent. Both are industrial, gas-filled glass tubes that emit light, but they are used differently. Neon is often bent, curved, and gestural. Fluorescent tubes are usually straight, standardized, and associated with commercial and institutional lighting. Immersion. An artwork that surrounds or envelops the viewer so you feel inside it rather than outside. The phenomenology of it, the study of conscious lived experiences. In art, this means focusing on how your body and senses perceive a work in real time. These are the quiz words, but more importantly, they are interpretive tools. Use them to explain not only what a work looks like, but what it does. We will use the same four-step method as before, but we need to adapt for the medium of light. So first thing you're going to do, describe. Ask what the actual source of light is. Is neon, is fluorescent, LED, projection, mirrors, or mist catching light? In light art, medium matters tremendously. For the second one, analyze. How do color, brightness, reflection, and shadow guide your eyes and the body? Does the work pull you inward? Does it flatten the space, deepen it, or dissolve the boundaries? Does it feel still or unstable? Third, put the artwork in the context. Ask what role technology, architecture, public space plays in the work. Is the artist engaging commercial public signatures, museum space, digital programming, or the experience of weather or nature? and force interpret. Does the work feel sculptural, atmospheric, spiritual, theatrical, or immersive? What kind of experience is being engineered for the viewer? Here is our guiding question. If an artwork has no physical mass and completely disappears the moment you unplug it, where does the art actually reside? This question gets right to the center of light art. It challenges the assumption that art must be durable, solid, materially stable. With light art, the work may exist in an unstable combination of hardware, electricity, architectural space, and human perception. The image here is James Turrell from 1966. It appears to be a glowing geometric form floating in the corner. Yet, the apparent object is really a perceptual event created by light. The thing you think you see is part illusion, part environment, part bodily experience. So one answer to the question is this. The art resides not only in the equipment and not only in the image, but in the carefully staged experience of seeing. In light art, perception itself becomes part of the medium. Our anchor artist is Keith Zonier. Zonier matters because he helped transform light from a commercial advertising tool into a sculptural and an environmental medium. He treated neon as a way of drawing in space. That phrase is important. He was not simply attaching glowing tubes to a wall. He was using line, color, light, the way somebody with some craftsmanship will use the marks. But now those marks exist physically in 3 dimensions and radiate into a surrounding room. He also matters because he helped to lead the post-minimalism movement away from the rigid box-like structures toward more fluid, regular, and bodily forms. Compare with the crisp precision of Donald Judd's boxes, Zonier's light works feel more improvised, more exposed, and more vulnerable. The key identifiers to remember are curved and looping neons, exposing wire, cables, transformers, and the incorporation of materials such as glass, sheer fabric, or architectural corners. Zonier does not hide the mechanism of doing this. He lets the work remain visibly electrical, material, and spatial. This quotation gives us a direct statement of Zonier's thinking. Neon is a line that emits light. I never thought of it as a tube of glass. I thought as a trapped gas. That's a wonderful way to understand his work. He's asking us to shift our attention away from the physical tube towards the luminous event happening inside. In other words, he's sculpting with glow, not merely with glass. The takeaway on this slide says exactly that. He was not making sculptures out of glass. He was sculpting with the glowing gas itself. This idea also helps us to connect with Zonier to drawing and painting. A traditional line on a paper is flat and inert. Zonier line is radiant, spatial, environmental. It occupies air, activates corners, spills color onto the walls, and makes the space feel animated. When you look at his work, try to see the glowing line not as an object boundary, but as an active force moving through the space. A short biography helps explain where this approach comes from. Zonier was born in Louisiana. Well, I love the food from there. And he has often been connected to the atmospheric qualities of the American South. Its neon signs, heat, color, vivid sensory environment. Whether we take that influence literally or more generally, place matters in how his work feels. When he arrived in New York in 1960s, he began using unconventional materials such as latex, flocking, sheer fabric to challenge the cold, rigid surface of minimalism. Remember Donald Jardine Marfa? That already placed him within a post-minimalist conversation. He began using commercial neon in 1968, and this was a major turning point. With neon, he could literally draw in the air with light. Context matters. Zonier is linked to the anti-form and post-minimalist scene alongside with figures such as Eva Hesse and Richard Serra. Like them, he rejects the idea that art must be rigid and self-contained object. His legacy, his legacy is significant because he helped expand sculpture from solid mass into hybrid environments made out of light, color, material, and installations. The slide gives us three signature methods that will help you recognize Onier. First, curved neon lines. These create gestural freedom. Instead of strict geometry of minimalism, Zonier brings the energy of drawing into a physical space. His lines bend, loop, sag, and travel. Second, exposed wires and hardware. This is an anti-illusion. He refuses to hide the mechanism or pretend the work is magical in a seamless way. The electricity, the chords, and even potential sense of danger are part of his work. Third, architectural intervention. Zonier uses corners, walls, floors to bounce color outward, turning the room itself into a canvas. The artwork is partly the hardware, partly the emitted light, and partly the space that it's received in. This is an important contrast with artists like James Turrell, who often hides the mechanism. Zonier leaves the apparatus visible and makes the visibility part of the aesthetic experience. Let's begin with the object facts. This work from 1969. It is made of neon, glass, aluminum, and it is hopefully still at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. These facts matter because of the work is not only neon. It also uses glass, a support structure, which means the light is interacting with reflective and transparent surfaces. The combination makes the perception more unstable and more layered. Even at the level of materials, you can see Zonier is pushing beyond a single medium. He is not satisfied with simply hanging a neon line in space. He is constructing a more complex and perceptual situation. What does this work do? It traps, reflects, and blends colored light using geometric planes of glass against the wall. Start with the title. Baoba, Baobab, is noted here as Haitian French for light bath, bathing moonlight. Whether or not students remember that exact translation, what matters is the bodily sensory suggestion. The title encourages us to think of light as not as detached optically fact, but as something you enter and feel. You notice the phenomenology of the piece. As you move around it, the glass panels overlap and the colors shift in your eyes. This means the work is not fixed from a single point of view. Your position changes as a visual result. Also notice the role of the space. The piece is not just only tubes and panels, it's also the color glow that radiates onto museum walls and floors. This is a key idea in light art. The boundary of the artwork extends beyond its hardware. So, although the arrangement may look relatively simply, the experience is active, bodily, and spatial. Here we move on into a much more complex installation. Display number 2 from 1970 uses foam rubber, fluorescent powder, plywood, strobe light, black light, neon, and glass. The dimensions are variable, and the work is at the Dia Art Foundation collection at Dia Beacon. Notice how expanded the medium has become. This is not a single object with one light source. It is an arrangement of different materials and technologies working together. The phrase variable dimensions is also important. It reminds us of that installation art often depends on a particular setup rather than a single fixed point of view. This already points us toward a more environmental model art. So let's talk about display number 2, 1970 artwork. What does this work do? It turns the artwork into a multi-sensory environment of light, reflection, material, instability. The first thing to notice is that neon is now only one element in a larger perceptual system. Zonnier is no longer presenting light as a line alone. He is building an environment in which different materials catch, emit, and transform the light. Second, the technology matters. Black light and strobe effects make vision feel active and unstable. Instead of calmly illuminating an object, the work makes seeing itself feel strange, heightened, and unsettling. Third, about the installation. This is not a self-contained sculpture on a pedestal. It is a spatial arrangement in which the viewer becomes aware of the atmosphere, interval, and bodily presence. Finally, immersion matters. Light, material, environment merge into one experience. The viewer is not outside the work looking in. The viewer is inside its perceptual field. So this work from 1969 is neon wrapping incandescent. It uses neon and incandescent fixtures, and its overall dimensions are variable. Right now it's in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. This pairing of neon and incandescent light is especially important because the two kinds of illumination carry different physical and emotional qualities. Neon tends to appear fluid, colored, linear, and cool in character. Incandescent light often feels more direct, hot, exposed, and domestic and utilitarian. So even before interpretation, the work sets up a dialogue between different kinds of light and different kinds of cultural associations. What does work do? It contrasts the harsh, hot light of bare bulbs with more fluid colored light of neon. This is where Zonnier post-minimalist quality becomes especially clear. The work lacks a rigid frame. It droops, drapes, and plugs directly into the wall. That gives it an anti-form quality. It feels provisional rather than perfectly engineered. Notice also the exposed mechanics. The black power cords are not something to ignore. They function like drawn lines and are visually important. In Zonnier work, the supporting system becomes part of the composition. This is also a good place to reinforce the vocabulary term neon versus fluorescent. Zonnier is taking materials often associated with commercial signage and using them for a much more open, messy, emotional, spatial form of expression. The result is a work that feels both industrial and intimate, both technological and improvised. This slide gives us three strong claims, 3-minute thesis statements that can help students answer quizzes. First, the light creates a space rather than just occupying it. The evidence is that immateriality light changes the perceived boundaries of a room. It can expand, soften, flatten, destabilize the space around us. Even the viewer's shadow can be becoming a part of the work. Second, the hardware is aesthetic. Zonier especially, cords, plugs, and transformers are not hidden. They ground the glowing, almost ethereal light in industrial reality. This also connects us to the work of post-minimalist and anti-form approaches. Third, perception is the medium. The work is only fully existing when a human eye receives and processes the light waves. Meaning depends on bodily movements, angle of view, and sensory experience. They're not just abstract claims, they are practical ways to explain what light art does. Now we expand out from Zonier to four artists to push light art in different directions. Dan Flavin represents what I would call the standard or the industrial module. He uses rigid, unaltered commercial fluorescent tubes and emphasizes serial placement. James Turrell represents the void. He hides hardware, uses light to create perceptual ambiguity and psychological illusion. Olafur Larsson represents the environment. He creates large, immersive atmospheres that often simulate natural phenomena. Ginny Voss represents the digital. She works with program LED and moves light art in a more explicitly computational and contemporary public language. Together, these artists show that light art is not one style. It is a field of approaches to perception, color, technology, and space. Dan Fabin is a crucial figure because he stripped light art down to a severe minimalist logic. He used standard, store-bought fluorescent light fixture for more than 3 decades. That matters because he deliberately rejected traditional sculpture craft and embraced commercial materials without disguise. His condition to our theme is that he lets ordinary industrial light alter the gallery space completely. The work is not just a tube anymore. It is the color and illumination spreading into the architecture. Compared with Zonier, the contrast is sharp. Zonier's neon tends to bend, loop, expose cables in a messy way. Post-minimalist way, by the way. Flavin keeps his tube straight, rigid, and geometrical and controlled. The key term here is seriality, repeating identical units according to a clear system. This work is the Nominal Tree from 1963, using daylight fluorescent light with variable dimensions. It's in the Guggenheim Museum. What should students notice here? First, the commercial fluorescent tubes are used without disguise. Flavin does not transform them into something else. They are ordinary industrial identity, which matters. Second, 1, 2, and 3 units create a simple serial progression. The mathematical clarity links him to minimalism and makes the title meaningful. Third, the wall and the surrounding light becomes part of the sculpture. The tubes seem simple, but the emitted light paints the floor and walls without leaving any physical pigment. And finally, light replaces traditional sculptural mass. Instead of a heavy object occupying a space, we have a relatively ordinary fixture generating in an environmental effect. James Turrell takes a very different approach. Originally trained in psychology and mathematics, Turrell is associated with the light and space movement in Southern California. That background helps explain his intense interest in the perception of itself. His connection to the theme is that he treats light almost like a physical substance you can touch, even though what you are experiencing is often a perceptual illusion. Well, let's look in relation to Zonier. He's almost the opposite. Zonier exposes wires, hardware, and the messy reality of the system, while Turrell hides bulbs, edges, the mechanism to create pure perceptual ambiguity. The key term here is phenomenology, because the meaning of Turrell's work lies in the lived bodily experience of seeing rather than a symbolic content. This work is Twilight Epiphany from 2012, a sky space with LED light sequence at Rice University in Houston. I personally witnessed this with my sculpture students, spending time there in the evening. This is another very nice Houston connection for us. Even in an online class, it helps to remind students that major works of contemporary art are not just only New York, London, Los Angeles. Houston itself is part of that conversation. So Rice's Twilight Epiphany gives us a local example of how light art can shape architecture, perception, even rhythm looking at it. What should we look for? Well, first, the opening in the roof frames the sky as if it were a material surface. Turrell turns the sky into something that looks almost tangible. Second, the program LED light changes how the eye reads naturally the twilight colors. In other words, he alters perception not by representing the sky, but changing the conditions under which we see it. The third aspect of it, architecture acts as a device for perception. The pavilion is not merely a shelter for the artwork, it is part of the artwork. And finally, the work rewards waiting, stillness, and slow looking. This is important for students to understand. Some contemporary artworks are eventful and spectacular. Turrell are often quiet, durational, contemplative. If I ask you to slow down, give the work time, and notice your own seeing being to a change. Olafur Alason brings light art into the realm of contemporary immersive environments. He's Danish Icelandic artist who uses sophisticated technology to create or simulate elemental forces such as sun, water, rainbow, fog, atmospheric effects. His connection to our theme is that he uses light not just to create an object, but to create a large-scale environment conditions. These often become social spaces in which viewers gather, reflect, photograph, and participate. His connection to Zonier is interesting. Like Zonier, he thinks in terms of light path, light as something you enter, but Eliasson expands that into a very large immersive ecosystems. So the key terms here is immersion. The viewer is surrounded by the work rather than standing outside of it. This work is the Weather Project from 2003 at Tate Modern in London, which I had the opportunity to observe on a long trips to London for many years, at least once a year. It uses monofrequency slides, projection foil, haze machines, mirror foil. Start with the scale. I feel that the enormous turbine hall and created the impression of an artificial indoor sun. This sun is light, art operating on monumental environmental levels. Second, the the mist matters because it makes light visible as atmosphere. That is a key strategy in light art generating, using haze, fog, reflection, visibility of the body to do something otherwise than material. Third, work has a social dimension. Viewers famously lay on the floor and wave their arms, looking up their reflected image in the mirror ceiling. So the installation becomes a collective experience, not just an individual one. And finally, notice the technology is not completely hidden. Like Zonier, Aliasson leaves seams and scaffolding visible, reminding us that this sublime artificial sun is also a constructed machine. So let's talk about Jenny Voss. She represents a more explicitly digital direction in light art. She is a Dutch contemporary artist for large-scale site-specific light works, often using programmable LEDs. Her important in this lecture is that she moves light art from continuous glow of gas to fluorescent systems into an era of pixels, programming, and digital kinetic display. Like Zonier, she treats light as sculptural and atmospheric. Unlike Zonier, her installations often operate at an urban and architectural scale through computer control and digital sequencing. This is useful for students because it shows that light art did not end with neon and fluorescent tubes. It continues into contemporary digital culture. This work is Light Phenomena from 2022, a glass cube with 16,000 LED modules, 57,600,000 LEDs total, installed at the Center for International Art in Unna, Germany. Before we even get to the formal analysis, the setting matters. The Center for International Light Art is a wonderful context for a work like this because it's devoted to the experience of light in space. It reminds us that light art is not a side note in contemporary art. It is rich and has an own environment and has own history and its own kinds of viewing conditions. What should we notice in this artwork? Well, first, the digital medium. Instead of continuous glow, we now have thousands of programmable pixels. Second, the work translates invisible natural processes into visible programmable light. That means that data, pattern, and sequence become part of the sculpture. Third, the cube makes digital animation feel sculptural. Rather than being a flat screen, it occupies the space as an object while still behaving like a moving image. And finally, technology is part of both of the image and the structure. In this work, light becomes data, atmosphere, and object at once. It is a good reminder that contemporary light art can be immersive and poetic, but also highly computational. Let's bring these five approaches together. Kizonier, drawing in space. He uses exposed wires, expressive neon, and anti-form strategies. Then Flavin, the standard of light. He uses rigid industrial fluorescent tubes and a minimalist logic of seriality. James Turrell, the void. He hides hardware and produces psychological and social ambiguity. Olafur Eliasson, the environmentalist. He creates immersive social simulations of natural phenomena. Ginny Voss, the digital. She uses program LED, kinetic light, and architecture scale. This synthesis matters because it helps students see how a single medium, light, can produce very artistic goals depending on the artistic matter and context. Use this slide as a study guide. Know the vocabulary first. Light art, perception, immateriality, neon or fluorescent light, immersion, phenomenology. Know the themes that claim the light. Create space rather than merely occupying it. The hardware can be part of the aesthetic. The perception is a true medium. The key ideas are here. The Zonier is aligned with post-minimalism, rejected the rigid boxes for more fluid curves, used bent neon, exposed wires, and mixed materials, and thought of neon as trapped gas rather than simply as glass tubing. So if you're reviewing this for the quiz, this is one of those slides to come back to. A very good way to prepare for the quiz is to take one word and explain it using one vocabulary term. One theme claims the two concrete visuals details. Use this slide to practice quick recognition. For Zonier, now Baobab number 3 from 1969, Display 2 from 1970, and The Tunnel of Tears from 2002. Look for bent neon, mixed materials, environmental color, and the sense of line moving through space. For Dan Flavin, remember the straight, commercially standard fluorescent tubes of the nominal tree. For James Turrell, remember Twilight Epiphany and the framed sky, the hidden technology and the quiet perceptual experience. For Olafur Eliasson, remember the giant artificial sun, haze, mirror, and collective experience of the weather project. For Ginny Voss, remember the LED cube made of thousands of programmable points of light. When you identify an image, students should also add one sentence of interpretation. Ask not only who made it, but what does the space, what it does to the space and the perception of it. This final slide lists the primary image sources and supporting art historical context. For this course, the most important habit is to begin with reliable museum and collection sources for basic object facts like title, date, materials, dimension, and location. Then build interpretation on top of that foundation. That concludes theme number 4, light art, perception, color, technology. In the next class, we can continue tracing how contemporary art moves beyond the stable object and increasingly turns experience itself into the subject.